All right, the last talk of the day, and I'm super impressed that you're still here, so thanks for that. My name is Mete Atamel. I am a developer advocate at Google. I'm based in London, but I love being in Italy and in Milan, so that's why I'm here. And today I'm going to be talking about Knative. Everything that I'm going to talk about, it's already on GitHub, so there's a link there and there's a QR code. So if you want to get the slides are there. If you want to get I'm going to show some demos. All the demos and more, they're all on GitHub as well, so everything is there. And before I start my talk, a couple of announcements. First, Knative is really a new technology, and I'm trying to understand what people know about it, and I'm also trying to understand what people do with serverless, and whether Knative solves their problems. So it's a short survey of 5 questions. You don't have to do it now, but if you have time later, feel free to fill it so that we can figure out like what people are thinking about Knative and what they know about it. And the other thing is that I am part of Google Cloud, and there's this program called Google Cloud for Startups. I just want to mention it here because I like to help startups. And there's a program with 3 levels, Start, Spark, and Surge, where you can get $3,000, $20,000, and $100,000 credits. So if you're part of a startup, or if you are setting up your startup, keep it in mind. And if you want, there's a link for that. So if you go to that link and apply, and if you're an eligible startup, you can get credits. So I just want to mention that in case you're part of a startup. Now let's go to our topic, Knative. Who is here, by the way, using Kubernetes? All right, and who's here using Istio? Just one? Oh, no one. Okay, so Knative is a technology built on Kubernetes. So I kind of assume that you know what Kubernetes is and how it works. And it also uses Istio. You don't have to know Istio, but basically it's built on top of them. So I'm kind of assuming that you know these technologies, but I'm going to explain them a little bit at the beginning anyway. What is Knative? It's a Kubernetes-based open source building blocks for serverless. And at this point, you might be thinking, how does this make sense? Because Kubernetes is very much about servers, right? Like Kubernetes is about running containers on virtual machines or physical machines. But either way, you're talking about servers. So how does Knative and Kubernetes come together? But that's what I'm going to explain at the beginning of my talk. When you think about a serverless framework, there are certain attributes that you probably want to be true. First of all, you don't want to think about servers, ideally. I mean, obviously there are servers somewhere, but as an application developer, you shouldn't really care about servers or the infrastructure. You want it to be idiomatic, meaning if you are a C# developer, for example, you want to use the ASP.NET Core framework probably. You don't want to use a special framework just to do serverless on a certain technology. Or if you're a Java developer, you probably want to use Spring Boot or something like that. And you want your serverless framework to support that, and you don't want to reinvent the wheel. And when you think about a serverless, you usually think about event-driven functions. So they are not synchronous usually, they're asynchronous that gets triggered by some kind of event, like an HTTP call or a pub/sub message or some other kind of event. And finally, once you write your serverless function, ideally it's portable. Like ideally you take it and run it in any place you want, right? You don't want to rewrite things just because you want to run it on Google Cloud or AWS or Azure or something else. So that's the attributes of a good serverless framework, and Knative supports all of these, and we'll go through these as we go through the presentation. Now, Kubernetes, for those of you who know, basically it's the de facto standard nowadays to run containers. So in Kubernetes, you define what's called a pod template, which is basically a template for creating 1 or more containers. Then you tell Kubernetes what you want to be true. In this case, we're saying we want to have 3 replicas, so we want to have 3 copies of the pod running at all times. Then Kubernetes looks at the nodes that you have, which are virtual machines or physical machines, and schedules these containers, so you don't have to worry about scheduling. And then once your containers are running, you can expose them to the outside world using a service, and people from the outside world gets to your service, to your pods, right? So Kubernetes is really great at, creating the containers, making sure that they run, and making sure that they're exposed to the world. Now, when you look at the serverless world, so the developers love serverless, right? Like we don't, as an application developer, I don't want to care about containers or VMs or anything like that. I just want to write my code and deploy it. So that's why I really like serverless. But at the same time, the operators, they really like Kubernetes because it basically allows them to have building blocks to run containers in a scalable and robust way. So there's this tension between application developers wanting to do serverless and operators wanting to use Kubernetes. And Knative tries to solve this problem, basically. It tries to bring these two worlds together where the operators can still run on Kubernetes, but people, application developers, they don't necessarily care about the details of what the underlying Kubernetes of their framework. So Knative, it's an open source project. It's on GitHub. And it provides a set of components. And these components are for serving, eventing, and build that we'll go through. You can think of this as the ingredients for serverless, the things that you need for serverless, but you don't have to build them yourself because Knative gives you these building blocks, and then you can build on top of that. It came from Google, but now it's an open source project, and a bunch of companies like Red Hat and IBM and a bunch of other companies, they're actually supporting this project. All right, and the Knative stack kind of looks like this. So at the bottom, we have Kubernetes. Everything runs on Kubernetes. On top, we have Istio. Istio is another open source project to manage traffic to your containers, right? It has many, many features for managing traffic into your cluster and controlling what happens within your cluster, setting rules and policies on the traffic, all that kind of stuff. I actually have a separate talk on just on Istio. So I can talk about it for an hour, but basically, Knative relies on Istio to do all the traffic management magic. And then on top of that, there's Knative with its build, serving, and events components. And then finally, the idea is that people will build even on top of Knative. So for example, there is something called serverless containers on Google Cloud Functions from Google Cloud that's built on Knative. There's IBM Cloud Functions that will be built on Knative. So the idea is that Knative will provide the basics of the serverless building blocks, and everyone else will build their tooling and their infrastructure on top of that. And Google Cloud is doing that, but it's not just Google Cloud, it's also other companies as well. So how do you use Knative? First, you need a Kubernetes cluster. You can do it locally if you have a local Kubernetes cluster running. But here I'm using Google Cloud. In Google Cloud, you get a Kubernetes cluster with a single command line tool. So you just say gcloud, container clusters create, give your cluster a name, define how many nodes you want in your cluster, define which zone your cluster is in, and then you will have a cluster. Then you need to create what's called a cluster role binding. So as I mentioned, we're going to install Istio as well because that's a dependency of Knative, and Istio needs to have this cluster role binding so that it can manage the traffic in the cluster. So you create the cluster role binding, and then you can install Istio. So this is how you would install Istio. By the way, in Google Cloud, you can use a single command to get a Kubernetes cluster with Istio already installed, but you can also do it manually if you're running it locally. So once you have all of that, then you can finally install Knative. You can install these three components, serving, build, and eventing separately, one by one, or you can just install them all at once. They don't have any dependencies, so you don't really need to install them all at once. If you only need, for example, build, you can only install build if you want. But in my case, I installed everything because I'm going to show you everything, right? So basically, get a Kubernetes cluster, get Istio on top, and then you can install whatever part of Knative you want on top of that. All right, so now I'm going to talk about the serving and the build and the eventing in that order. But before we do that, let me just make sure that my cluster is running. So here I have, I'm in Google Cloud console. And if I look at Kubernetes engine, which is managed Kubernetes in Google Cloud, the Wi-Fi is a little bit slow, but hopefully things will work out. So I already have a Knative cluster. And let me just make sure that everything is running. So if I do kubectl, get pods, and Knative gets installed into separate namespaces. So if I do get pods in Knative serving, I should see some pods running for that. And let's make sure that the eventing is running as well. Those are running, and build as well. So everything seems to be running. So we're in a good shape. Now let's talk about eventing. Serving. So what is serving? Serving basically enables you to go from, to deploy your containers in a serverless way. So it basically allows you to go from a container to a function running running on top of Knative, where the traffic is already set up and all the default features are already set up. So what happens is that you basically just point to your container and say, this is my image, just deploy this. Knative will deploy it. It will start routing traffic to that container. And you also get features like automatic scaling. So by default, the container will run in a single pod, but it will automatically scale up to whatever max you set. And it will also scale down as well. So if you don't use the container, it will scale down to 0 as well. So with a single command, you basically get your container running with auto scale already set up. And yeah, everything is scaled up and down seamlessly. Then you get features like traffic splitting. So if you have multiple versions of your container, you can set up traffic splitting between them. And all the networking details of how to get traffic from clients to the container is taken care of for you because there's Istio underlying. So Istio takes care of all of that. There's a little bit of terminology when it comes to Knative serving. So first, you need to create a Knative service. And by the way, this is different from Kubernetes service. In Kubernetes, there's also this notion of service, but this is a separate thing. It's a Knative service that you define. So in this service, I'm going to show you the configuration, but you basically just point to your container, and you also have some configuration for your container. Once your service is created, your service has a configuration. And then from the configuration, Knative creates a revision. A revision, it's basically a snapshot of your service with a specific configuration, right? And then once you have a revision, Knative will route the traffic to that revision immediately. So it will immediately start getting traffic. Now, if you change something about the configuration, then Knative will create a new revision, and it will update the route to so that the traffic goes to the new revision, right? So that's how it works. So every time you change something in the configuration, it creates a new revision, and the route gets updated automatically to go to that new revision. Now, if you don't want this, because maybe you're testing things, you can also have it so that a new revision gets created, but you don't send any traffic to it yet. Or you can do traffic splitting so that you have multiple revisions and you can send like 80% of traffic here or 20% of traffic there. So you can do stuff like that. But basically, at the top level, you have a service with a configuration. From there, you get a revision, and then you choose how to route traffic to it using the primitives of Knative. So let's take a look at this. So if I go to my tutorial, by the way, this is my tutorial that you can go through yourself if you want, and I'm going to refer to it as we go along. So I created this Hello World application. It's a .NET Core application. And what I did is that I created an image. I pushed that image to Docker, so it's on Docker Hub. And then the first thing that we need to do is we need to create a service YAML file for this, so that we're going to create the Knative service. As you can see, the API is a Knative API, and the kind is service. I give my service a name, and I'm going to deploy it to the default namespace. And now this is the configuration of my service. The first thing to note is that I'm saying run latest. What this means is that when I deploy this service, immediately update the route to point to the service, right? So I'm telling Knative immediately start routing traffic to this container, right? So that's what that means. And the configuration is basically, I'm just pointing to an image. So hello world C# version 1. And I'm also passing some environment variables, in this case target and C# sample v1. So we will read this environment variable and we'll just print it out. It's very simple, but it serves the purpose of showing how this works. All right, and then we'll apply the service, and we'll watch some of the Kubernetes things and see what happens. So let's go to our terminal. Let's see if I'm in the right place. Yep. And let's start watching. So what I'm doing is that I'm watching the pods, the Knative service, the Knative configuration, the Knative revision, and Knative route. So I'm watching everything and see what happens. All right, so right now I only have one pod running for something else that I'm going to show you later, but you can ignore that for now. But let's just create our service. Now the service is created, and immediately you can see that there's a pod that's being initialized. There's a Knative service that's already created. There's a Knative configuration that's created for the service. And there's a Knative revision 001 that's created as well. So everything is already created. Now to get to the service, in Istio, we are using Istio for traffic management. There is something called ingress. that controls the traffic to the cluster. So we need to get the IP of that ingress, and we need to ping that IP to get to our cluster. So I think I already have that. So let me just double check. So I already have that IP. And let me show you this. So what you would normally do is that you would curl to that IP, but you would also mention what service you want to hit. So in this case, this is the name of our service. This is the namespace, and this is my example domain, right? So that's what you would do if you didn't set your custom domains. But in my case, I set a dummy custom domain to make things easier. So if you go to tutorial, I talk about how to set the domains. But there's something called nip.io. It's a dummy DNS service where it basically maps anything .nip.io to an IP address. So that's what I'm using for my demo. But once you set that up, what you can do is you can basically just do this instead of sending the headers. So let's make sure that this works. So if I do curl, now we are going through Istio, and then it will go to Knative service, and then it says hello C# sample v1, right? So that's it. So everything is up and running. But now, if we change anything about the configuration, so remember, we have the service, we have a configuration, and we have revision 1. But if we change anything in here, it's going to create a new revision. For example, in this case, I have v2 on my service, and the only thing that I'm changing is this environment variable, right? So I'm using the same image, but I'm changing the message from v1 to v2. If I do that, it will update my service. So let's take a look. So let's do kubectl apply, service v2. Now, what you will see is that it will immediately create a new pod. The service is still there, and the configuration is still there. Let me just do this. And then you'll see that there's a new revision that's been created, 002, and the route is also updated right now. So we created a new revision, and if I do a curl again to the same place, I get hello C# sample v2 because now we updated the route to point to that one. Now if I change my code and create a new image and push that image to the Docker Hub, I can also trigger that to create a new configuration. So for example, in this case, I changed my message from hello to bye, and I created a new image called v3, and I pushed it to Docker Hub. And in this case, I'm just changing the image value. So that's also a configuration change. And if we apply this one, and if you look at the pods, you will see that a new revision gets created right away. And if we do a curl, you see that now I'm running new code, right? Everything is very dynamic. You might not want this, though, because maybe you want to test things out before you push the code. So for that, there's traffic splitting. For example, let's say you have revision 1. So that's the one that we already deployed. But you want to create a new revision. You have some new code that you want to deploy, but you don't want this to get all the traffic yet, right? What you can do is that instead of doing run latest, you can say release. And what this says is that I have two revisions, the one that's already there and the one that I'm going to create right now. And I'm going to do rollout %20. So what this means is that this new revision 4 will get 20% of the traffic. So it won't get all of the traffic, it will only get 20% of the traffic, right? So that's how you can do traffic splitting with a new version. Let's try that out. Oh, service 4. And then a new version is created. And then if let's do like some curls like this. So if I do, if I do curls like this, now it's v4. Now v1, by the way, if you look at v1, v1 is terminating, because what happened is that we didn't use version 1 for a while, so it scaled down to 0. So that's why it was hanging here a little bit, because it was restarting again. And now you can see that most of the calls are going to v1, but some of them are going to v4, right? So this is for a new revision that you just rolled out. but you can also do traffic splitting between two existing revisions. So for example, in this case, I'm doing the release mode again, but I'm referring to version 1 and version 3. So these are both revisions that already exist. And I'm saying the rollout percent is 50, so I'm just splitting between them 50%. We can do that as well. Let's see how that works. Service v5. And then if we do curl again, now it's hanging because it's creating the, it's restarting the v3 that probably went to sleep. But once it comes back, now okay, we have v1, v3, so roughly it will be v1, v3, but for some reason in this case it's mostly v3. Yeah. So that's how traffic splitting works. And the other cool thing about Knative is that you can basically hook it up to anything you want. For example, does anyone here know or use Twilio? No? Twilio, it's a really cool platform to basically respond to phone messages and phone calls and stuff like that in a programmatic way. So what you can do in Twilio, let me find that. So for example, in here, I have a number from Twilio. And in this number, you can say, if someone gives me a call, make a webhook call to this URL. Or if someone sends me a message, an SMS message, make a call to this endpoint. And as you can see, this endpoint is pointing to my Knative service. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let Knative respond to SMS messages, basically. That's what I want to do. And just to show you the code for this, oh, by the way, you can also configure the auto-scaling. So as I mentioned, Knative scales down to 0 by default. But if you don't want that, you can come here and set min and max values. So if the min is 1, then it won't scale down to 0. And you can also set a value to max as well, to something like 5 if you don't want that. And there's also some different kinds of auto-scaling that you can set up. By default, the auto-scaling is concurrency-based, meaning each pod will get 100 requests by default, but you can change that. Or if you want something like a CPU-based concurrency, you can change it as well. So all of this is configurable. But let's look at Twilio. So in Twilio, what I did is that first I changed my endpoint to point to my Knative service. And then I used the Twilio C# client. And then I wrote a controller. And what it does is that it gets an HTTP call, and it gets the message. So that's the SMS message. And it will respond back, and it will just say Knative copycat says, and it will just echo back the message, right? It will just echo back that message. So I built the image like this. I push it to Docker Hub. Then I create a service, just like before. Nothing is special here, except that the image is different now. It's Twilio C#. And then once we apply it, let's see what happens. So let's go back here. Let's go to Twilio. Sorry. All right, Twilio is created, and the revision is created, and let's see if this works. So here what I have is, I'm looking at my Android messages on my phone, and I'm going to just send a message here. So this is my Twilio number, and I'm just going to say, hello from, where are we? Milan. Now it's going from Twilio to my, hopefully to my Knative service. The service wakes up, it runs the code, and it will reply back, and it will say, the Knative copycat says hello from Milan. So it works. So you can connect to anything you want, really. It's a service that's accessible everywhere. Okay, so that's Knative serving. Now let's look at Knative eventing next. So what Knative eventing enables you to do is basically, it lets you connect different kinds of event sources to different kinds of event consumers. And then you can also specify some kind of flows in the middle, right? So that's what Knative eventing is for. And there's a few event sources that you can specify. So these are the things that are implemented already in Knative. For example, you can listen events from GitHub. You can listen events from Google Cloud Pops Up. So there's a messaging service called Google Cloud Pops Up. So you can listen messages from that. You can listen messages from AWS. And there will be more coming, basically, but these are the ones that we have today. And then you can connect them to Knative services. So once you get the message from these sources, you can pass the messages to the event consumers. And the way it looks is that it's something like this. So you have your event source. So this is the thing that will listen the messages from whatever you specify, like Google Cloud pops up, for example. Then once we have the message, it will pass it to a channel. A channel can be an in-memory channel, or it can be a durable channel, something that's more durable than memory. Then people who are interested in the channel, they will create subscriptions. So this is a Knative service that will subscribe to the channel and will get the message. And then there's another service that will get the message, but you can also subscribe other channels to this channel. So you can kind of chain different services together. So you can have a message that goes to this channel, then it goes to this service, then from there it flows to another channel, then from there it will go to another service, so on and so forth, right? So things can be changed. Let me show you one example of this. So what I have here is that, so to set this up, first you need to set up a source. So in this case, I want to listen messages from Google Cloud pops up. It's a messaging framework that runs on Google Cloud. So for that, I need to create a pops up source. And then once I have those messages, I want to save it to an in-memory channel. So I want to create a pops up source and a channel. So let me double check that they actually are there. kubectl get pops up source. So I already have my source set up from before. And if I do get channel, I already have my channel is already there as well. Then what I did is that I created a really simple C# app that gets the message and just logs it out, right? Nothing like special. It just gets the message and dumps the message out. And I built the image, and then I create a subscriber.yamo file. And what this does is that it first creates a service. So this is a Knative service, just like before. But it also creates a subscription. And this subscription is pointing to a channel and pointing to a service. So it basically connects the service that I created here to a channel that I already created. So it makes a connection. That's what subscription does. So let's do this. Oh, sorry, we are not in the right place. Eventing. And if you take a look, there's already a message dumper that's being created. And what we can do is that let's look at the logs. So to do that, I will just say kubectl logs follow. So let's follow the logs, and let's just pass in the, first I need the pod ID, so let's just say, let's look at the pods. And then get the ID of this pod. And now what it's doing is that it's basically waiting to receive messages. Now let's send a message to this topic. And to do that, there's a command I can run. So what I'm doing here is that I'm sending a message with a body hello world to this topic called testing, right? And now the message is going to the pops up. From pops up, the Knative source is listening for that message. It gets the message. It saves it to a channel, in-memory channel. And from the channel, we have a subscription to the Knative service. And the Knative service gets that, and it logs it out. And it says, this is the message I received. And the data is base 64 encoded. So this is the body of the message. And if I do base, I think it's like this, but I don't remember. Oh, let's do this, echo. I think this is the right syntax, but I'm not sure. Let's see. Yeah, if I do this, you can see that it's actually hello world, right? So we made the connection. This is not too interesting, but it basically shows that you can kind of connect things that are not related using Knative eventing in the middle. We can do something more interesting. For example, we can do something like this. In Google Cloud, there's something called cloud storage, where it's a place you can save any kind of files you want. So you can create a bucket here and save a file. And then you can also enable messages on the bucket, meaning every time you save a file on the bucket, it can emit a pops-up message to a topic that you want. So what can happen is that you save an image that triggers a pops-up message to a topic. Then you can make Knative eventing, listen that topic, and save that message to a channel. And then from the channel, you can create a subscription to a Knative service. And then from then on, you can do whatever you want, right? And in our case, we can make a call to Vision API. Vision API, it's a machine learning API from Google Cloud, where you can pass an image, and it extracts labels of that image, right? It tells you what that image is about. So what we can do is that we can save an image here in the storage, and we can let that trickle all the way to Vision API, make the call to Vision API with the image, get the labels, and present to the user, right? So we are kind of connecting the Google Cloud Storage to Google Cloud Vision API using Knative eventing in the middle. So let's see how we can do that. By the way, I have another example for translation API that I'm not going to cover here, but you can take a look. But let's go to the Vision API one. So the application is basically first, when it gets a message, it gets a cloud event from the pops up topic. So we need to decode that. And then once we decode that, we have the details of the image. And then what we are doing in the code is that we create a Vision client. So this is a Vision API client. And then we make a call to detect labels async. So we are basically saying, here's my image with this URL. Can you extract labels from this image? And this uses machine learning to extract the labels. And then we order the labels with scores, because each label has a score, confidence score. And then we just display the labels. That's all we do here. So we create an image and push to Docker Hub. And then we create a service just like before, except we are pointing to the image that we just pushed. And then we create a subscription to the channel that connects the channel and the service. And that's it. So let's just, first let's get this initialized. So this is C#, kubectl apply. So this creates a service and subscription. And then what I'm doing here is that I created a bucket where I can save my image. Then I enabled notifications on the bucket so that every time I save an image, it sends a pops-up message. And then finally, we can test our service, right? So let's copy this. And let me look at the pods. So my Vision pod is running. And if you follow this pod, now it's waiting for the message. And now I can go to my console. And let's go to cloud storage. Let's see where it is. So this is storage. And this is a Knative bucket that I created before. And I'm going to upload an image here. And let's upload this image, right? You can see it's a beach with some sunset. Now I'm uploading the image from my laptop to this bucket. This bucket will trigger a pops-up message that a new file gets created. Knative is listening that message. It will get the message, and it will call a Knative service, and the Knative service will make a Vision API call to extract the labels and display to us. So if everything worked, if you come here, you see the logs of the service, and it says, so it received the content, so this is the content of my message, and it makes a call to Vision API, and then it says, this picture is labeled, sky, body of water, sea, nature, coast, water, sunset, blah, blah, blah. So it's not that impressive, but the impressive part is that you're basically connecting things that are not related to each other, storage and Vision. And, you know, everything is running in Google Cloud, but Knative part, it can run anywhere. It doesn't have to run in Google Cloud. It can run anywhere there's Kubernetes. All right. Where's my presentation? Yeah. And the last thing that I want to talk about is Knative build. But before I talk, let me kick my build so that when I'm talking, the build is going on, and then we can take a look at it, right? So let's do that. So I have, where are we? See the build. I have 2 builds here. Let me apply them first, and then I will talk about them afterwards. So I'm applying one, and let's apply another one. Docker. So the first one is going to kick a build that will build an image and push it to Google Container Registry, which is basically like Docker Hub, but it's only specific for Google Cloud. And the second one is another one that will kick a build and push it to Docker Hub, right? And we'll take a look at both as they're working. All right. So Knative build, basically what it enables you to do is that it enables you to go from source code to an image in a repository, right? So it enables you to set that up so that you can basically submit your source code, and then in the end, you have some image in some repository that you specify. And it has some primitives built. It's basically one or more steps that you can define. You can take a build and make it a template out of it so they can use it in many places. You can use a number of different builders to actually do the build. And finally, if you need to authenticate, there's service accounts that you can set so that you can authenticate with things like Docker Hub, right? So at the very high level, this is what you have for Knative build. And in my tutorial, I show how to do this. So let's look at the first one. So for example, in this case, I am defining a build, and I'm saying this is my source. So I'm just building a hello world sample. And then these are my steps. You can have as many steps as you want, but in this case, I just have one step that's named build and push. And it's using something called Canico. Canico, it's an open source project to build images, basically, without you having to have Docker on your locally. And then it basically builds the image in your Kubernetes cluster in a separate pod. So I'm referring to my Docker file here, and I'm specifying my destination here. In this case, I'm pushing to Google Container Registry. And you would replace your project ID, obviously, here. But this will build and push it to Google Container Registry. Google Container Registry doesn't need any authentication, so that's why we didn't specify any authentication here. So you just apply it. You can look at the build. You can look at the pods that actually execute the build. And when the build is finished, you can actually see that the pod is completed, and then you know that your build is basically ready. So let's take a look, actually. Before that, let me talk about Docker Hub. So if you want to authenticate, like if you want to put something on Docker Hub, you need to authenticate. It gets a little bit more complicated. So what you need to do is, first you need to create a secret. This is a Kubernetes construct where you specify your username and password. And then from that, you need to create a service account that refers to that secret. So in this case, I'm creating a service account with that secret name. And then once we have those, you create a build just like before. Everything is the same except there's a service account name here. So I'm referring to a service account, and build will use a service account to do the authentication, right? So that's the only difference here, and the rest is pretty much the same. So if we go back to our builds, so they're pending. I'm not sure. Let's look at pods. Yeah, they're still running. They're still in its stage. So I don't think we'll be able to see them finished. But if we take a look, let's say Docker Hub, then I have hello C#. So as you can see, I ran this 10 days ago, but eventually you will have your image here, and I tagged it with Knative build so that I know that it's Knative build that's pushing this. So that's what you would have eventually with Knative build. All right, yeah, I think that's all I have. So if you want to know more, my tutorial is there. And then if you want to contribute to Knative, it's on GitHub. And we will also have it so that you can have Knative on Google Cloud in a really easy way. So if you go to cloud.google.com/Knative, there will be more info about that. and I think we have 10 minutes, so if you have any questions, I'm around. Thank you. Any questions? No? Okay, well, I'm here, so thank you.